All right, it's time for another book review. This time we're going to talk about Chaos Monkeys, a obscene fortune and random failure in Silicon Valley. A book by, let me see if I can say this name right, Antonio Garcia Martinez. So what this book is, this is a book. A book. It's kind of a biography, a memoir from a man who was in the ad industry in Silicon Valley for a long time. And the idea was is that he started with kind of its own startup company. Then he branched off into he started with a startup company that he was an employee of, excuse me. Then he branched off into his own startup company. And then that startup was eventually bought by Twitter. And instead of him going to Twitter, he actually went to Facebook. And so it kind of tracks that progress of him as he went through the years. And then it ends on him leaving Facebook and actually going to Twitter for a job. Now, as far as the book goes, the book does it's controversial. So you look at it, this guy just recently, the author, was hired by Apple, but wasn't there very long because the Apple employees actually revolted against it, having him as part of the Apple team. And really the reason why is the book is the best way to describe it is Silicon Valley bro culture. When you think about the girls are like this and like bro, kind of that kind of culture. And so it's a bit sexist. It's a bit, there's places of it that are super extreme that you're like, oh, come on, dude. But what's really interesting about the book as a whole is that it kind of traces that journey in Silicon Valley. And really, as you start reading about Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and people along those lines, they're fairly intense. They're intense people, and you can see that in this book too. And so it kind of traces the journey of him going from a company that he sees that it's failing, and while it's still successful financially, it's kind of headed downward, and kind of seeing that trace is very interesting. Seeing him trace that's very interesting, and then seeing him go through all the kind of ups and downs of being in a startup, where you're looking at it from a perspective of, okay, we've got this great big vision. And then they get to a point where they're like, our vision is going to be better kind of suited as part of another company. It's better suited as part of a bigger scale thing. And then he goes to Facebook, and you start to see Facebook, him kind of trace the really eccentricities of Facebook culture, which is really interesting. And really kind of see kind of how the ad industry and kind of the struggles of Facebook to actually monetize. Because it's right at the time in the early 2010s when Facebook had built up this huge user base. They were going to IPO, but really, how were they going to make money? How were they going to make money for advertisement? That was a big question mark for a while. And then you kind of see kind of the downfall there, where kind of his way of thinking, his kind of intensity actually leads to him having to leave Facebook. So it's a really kind of interesting trace of kind of Silicon Valley, kind of the life, the start and stop life in Silicon Valley. But you kind of have to move past the kind of bro-y culture and feminist and sexist parts of the book to actually enjoy it. When you look at it overall, I kind of think the book is really interesting. I don't know that enjoying it is the best word for it, because it's especially interesting when you look at it from a perspective that Google and Facebook, the way they've monetized is through advertisements. And so it's interesting to trace kind of that kind of life cycle and how that kind of evolved into the behemoth that it is today.